Forget frequently asked questions,
common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
go above and beyond.
They become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
with Richard Jacobs.
Before we begin, a note from our sponsor. I'm Richard Jacobs, Executive Director of the nonprofit Finding Genius Foundation and host of the Finding Genius Podcast. In late 2016, I was rear-ended at 65 miles an hour by a truck on the highway, which sent me off-road into a ditch. The impact of the collision gave me a concussion and other injuries. At the hospital, a CT scan showed that I had thyroid nodules, which turned out to be cancer. It was then, when I had a biopsy of my neck, that I realized even if I was a millionaire, I wouldn't want a second or a third biopsy due to the pain and the invasiveness of it. And appointments at that time for thyroid experts were 3 to 6 months out. And I was worried about dying now, even if that was irrational. So because of this, I've decided to raise money to conduct a literature review on steroids, on the causes of anxiety and depression, a condition that affects well over 50 million people in the United States and hundreds of millions worldwide. Our goal is to create a codex, a guide that reveals all possible treatments for anxiety and depression for people that live with the condition, or for loved ones that have it, as my wife and my son do. To find out more about our fundraiser, visit findinggeniusfoundation.org and click on current initiatives. And now to our guest.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius podcast, now part of the Finding Genius Foundation. I have Elia Abi-Jaoude. He has an MD and a PhD. He's a psychiatrist, also an assistant professor at University of Toronto. And we're going to talk about mental health of children and adolescents currently. So, Elia, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, if you would, tell me a bit about your background. How did you get into this field? What interested you in it?
I mean, first of all, I've always been interested in medicine when I eventually studied, and then psychiatry in particular. I found it fascinating. And I've always been interested in asking fundamental questions about things. So questions related to things that we take for granted, assumptions or ways of viewing things. And as a psychiatrist, I work in a number of different areas, but a large part of my work is working with adolescents who are in crisis. And I've been doing this work for a number of years now, and it has been an interesting time to be working with this population of people. There are a number of things that have been going on that really caught my attention and got me thinking about what could be going on with the people. I should, by the way, Richard, as a quick aside, and maybe I should have said that at the outset, I just want to make it clear that all the opinions I'm going to be expressing today are my own only and do not necessarily represent those of any of my employers, especially that some of the thoughts, the opinions I have are maybe run counter to the common way of viewing things.
No problem. I understand. Go ahead.
Okay. So basically, I as I mentioned, I started a number of years ago working with adolescents in crisis, and a number of things got my attention. So first of all, the volumes, the numbers of people that we were seeing, of young people that were coming in crisis, just kept going up, and that I found quite concerning, but also curious, like what was happening with these young people? What was going on that causing so many young people to be experiencing such difficulties, feeling like they're depressed or anxious, to the point that some of them have been self-harming or having suicidal thoughts. So, you start looking for themes, trying to understand what's going on. And I have to say here also that this is obviously colored by my own background. So I grew up in a different time and place. And, when we deal with kids, we're very much influenced by by our own experiences as kids. And I grew up I'm from a different generation than kids of today. I'm Generation X, grew up in the 70s and 80s. and also grew up in what could be described as a more collectivist culture, where there's tight social networks. And so, looking at what's happening, I started trying to understand what's going on with adolescents today. And this has been a journey for me since a few years now, where there are a number of things that I wonder about that could be contributors to what we've been seeing.
Well, what are you seeing? You said you're seeing anxiety and depression in kids. What ages, and what are some of the nuances of what you're seeing? More boys and girls, or different in boys or girls?
Well, I see across the age range, but I work primarily with adolescents, and it seems to be it's both boys and girls, but it is something that has been affecting, in particular, girls. This has been across the continent. So I work in Toronto, in a largest city in Canada, but this is something that is not unique to Toronto. It's across Canada, and certainly very much across the United States as well. And we have been seeing an increasing number of adolescents, in particular girls, but again, not just girls, who have been struggling to the point that they are seeking care in the hospital, needing to be admitted because of safety concerns. And a lot of adolescents who are actually even attempting suicide and ending up needing medical admission, sometimes even in the ICU, because of serious attempts. So that is something that we have been observing since a number of years now. And it just, you are compelled to be thinking and wondering about what is going on, what is happening such that adolescents are struggling like this.
What are some of the protocols that seem to help adolescents that are struggling? What's the recommendation, or what do you engage in?
So a number of things. First of all, we work with the adolescent to try to understand what's happening in their lives. There are some common themes. So often it is challenges with either at home with their families, or with some of their friends, their peers, or academic challenges. These are the most common and recurring themes. And so we work on them. We work on these things together with the adolescent and the family, try to open up channels of communication, addressing safety concerns, and helping them in very practical ways to navigate the challenges that they're experiencing and problem solve around them, but also learning ways to kind of manage distress so that they don't get overwhelmed by distress when they're encountering challenges.
Right. So what are some of the strategies? Do you use CBT? Is it medication? What have you found are some of the effective treatment modalities?
Well, I would say it is both much simpler, but also more complex than what you just mentioned. So, we can talk about some manualized treatment like CBT, and that certainly has its role and can be helpful. Medications can sometimes be helpful, but most of the time we're not talking about either of these. Most of the time we're talking really about very practical stuff. You're really going down to basics, basically getting them to open up channels of communication with their families, exploring what they're experiencing, and getting them to learn some distress tolerance strategies to kind of manage stress, but also normalizing stress to some degree. Like the goal is not to be completely stress-free or not to experience any strong emotions. It can be useful, including strong negative emotions. So, and we don't want to be conflating having strong emotions like sadness or distress, or conflating suffering with having mental illness. It's not necessarily the case. We don't want adolescents to be suspect of their emotions. So we talk about all of these things, and I think once an adolescent feels heard from professionals working with them, but also importantly from their families, and the families feel that they're able to start having connections with adolescents, it can make a big difference. I'm not saying that all gets resolved and perfectly rosy after some basic but these are things that we start with and can turn things around to start moving things in the right direction.
Before we continue, I've been personally funding the Finding Genius podcast for 4.5 years now, which has led to 2,700 plus interviews of clinicians, researchers, scientists, CEOs, and other amazing people who are working to advance science and improve our lives and our world. Even though this podcast gets 100,000 plus downloads a month, we need your help to reach hundreds of thousands more worldwide. Please visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click on Support Us. We have 3 levels of membership from $10 to $49 a month, including perks such as the ability to see ahead in our interview calendar and ask questions of upcoming guests, transcripts of podcasts you're interested in, the ability to request specific topics or guests, and more. Visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click Support Us today. Now back to the show.
Well, what's an example of this? How do you get a kid that's sullen and doesn't want to talk and is depressed to start talking to their family? How would you do that?
Well, if first of all, we want to, getting a kid to talk, first of all, they need to feel that they will be listened to if they talk, right? If they don't want to talk to their family and they're angry, the first thing is you want to establish a connection with the young person. You want to understand what they're experiencing. You want to show them that you truly are interested in them and what they have to say. You see, communication, it's a two-way process. It's someone expressing themselves and communicating, but also it's making the space for them to be able to express themselves and communicate. And so we do that with the person. We show them that we are very keen and wanting to learn about what they're experiencing. And then we get the families to do the same. Often families, they get caught up in a rut that is, life is stressful. Everyone's running around, dealing with whatever they need to deal with. Adolescence is a period where the young people are seeking to be independent and do their own thing rather than just be relying on their family. And parents are often stressed these days, their jobs and whatever else is going on in their lives. So it's very easy to start drifting apart and not having much of a positive relationship. And then the relationships become defined more by practicalities or arguments and conflict about things. And so the goal is to kind of counter that and to get parents back to connect with their children and be part of their lives and, rebuild relationships. So it's not like, so when you tell me an adolescent who doesn't want to talk to their family, it's not like we can tell them we can do some magic and right away they start talking. It's about rebuilding the relationship, and it's really small steps. So it's, again, teaching the parents to make the space, the time and space for their young kids to be heard. And it starts with some very basic stuff, very practical, basic things, and then with the aim that gradually, as adolescents feel listened to, feel validated, importantly, that they're able to express themselves more to their parents. So this is key because, that's the other thing is often parents don't want to see their adolescents in distress, which is a normal, natural reaction out of any caring parent. But often as a result of this, they inadvertently can be dismissive, not intending to, but because they want their young person to get better and to not be dwelling in difficulty, they want them to kind of move on. Oh, you shouldn't feel this way. All is good. Look what others are going through, or let's fix this and we'll be done with, kind of thing. I'm characterizing here a little bit, but not by much. And what we want them is to show their young people that they are interested. They can tolerate seeing them in distress. They can take it, and that adolescents should not be hesitant to express that. And the parents will be fine. They'll be supportive. They'll listen to them. They'll show they're supportive, and then together with the adolescent. And of course, how active the parent is will depend on what's appropriate for the adolescent in terms of their developmental stage. Then the next step would be resolving things together, finding solutions and such.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
Self-harm figure into this equation? Like, why does it happen in teenagers and adolescents, and how does it manifest?
Well, I mean, this is a very concerning development. This is something, while self-harm has always been around, it was never as much as it is today. Today, it is quite common among adolescents, very disturbingly so. And most of the time, I should say, I mean, there are various reasons why adolescents might engage in self-harm, but most of the time they do it as a way to deal with distress. They get so overwhelmed with distress that they find that self-harming and experiencing pain, the physical pain, can help them deal with the emotional distress. And it is quite disturbing how come they're feeling so overwhelmed to the point that they engage in these behaviors. And the other thing is, how does it even occur to them? You start wondering, like, where does it even occur to you, no matter how distressed you are, that you might cut or do other forms of self-harm to manage this distress? And the thing is, because it's so common, they hear about it all the time. It's part of the narrative, what they talk about. And then social media has been a big issue, where these things are shared often on social media. There's and to the point, even sometimes they might there are places where people show images and share images of their cutting and such. So it becomes, unfortunately, often in a very counterproductive way, promoted and such. So this is self-harm is unfortunately a big part of what we deal with today.
I mean, how dangerous is it if you have a child that's self-harming? If they're, like, let's say, cutting their arms, does that mean it's going to very quickly progress to a bigger problem, or, and how do you intervene at that point?
So it might progress to a bigger problem, and I think it definitely does. It is a concerning sign if that's happening. And so basically, it is not something that should be ignored. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to progress to suicidality, but it may very well be. It is associated with suicidality, so it may be indicative of something very concerning that's going on. So regardless, it is definitely a sign, and it's not a healthy way of coping, and it's a sign that the young person is struggling quite significantly with their emotions, to the point that they feel like they have to engage in this. So the intervention is to open up a channel of communication. So if you're the parent, to start to understand. So first of all, you don't want to freak out. You do want to take it very seriously, and we do want to show adolescents that we're taking it seriously, but we don't want to be blaming. We don't want to be getting upset with them. We want to be trying to understand them. That shows, okay, what's going on in our lives today that's not working great? What can we do to make things better? And then having a chat with the adolescent to understand what's happening in their world, in their lives. Often parents are not aware of what's happening. So so to helping to be, parents have been through adolescence, challenging as it is, and often can use their experiences to the benefit of young people. And so it is important that they be able to connect with them, to establish some trust, to start exploring these things. And then teaching adolescents, this is often, it might require some professional help of some sort, but basically teaching adolescents different ways of managing distress, so that when you're in distress, what are ways that you can deal with that don't involve self-harm. And often this involves some very non-judgmental exploration with the young person, so they know that self-harm is not healthy. So we don't need to lecture to them about this. So rather, I like exploring it with them. So what of self-harm? What does that bring you with a cutting, let's say? Okay, it relieves when you're distressed, when you're overwhelmed with emotions. Okay, so that's why you do it. I understood. Are there any downsides to it? And let's explore it in a very open way. And then typically most adolescents will come up with all sorts of downsides to it, and then say, okay, so I know that you experience a lot of you get very overwhelmed with difficult feelings. And the self-harm is a way to try to manage that. How can you? Shall we explore different ways? What if there are different ways to help you to manage distress without having to resort to that? And that's basically how you work with them.
Well, very good. What kind of practitioners would help? Are there ones that specifically address self-harm? And what are they called for parents that are looking for this help?
So really, I would say any mental health practitioner, any therapist or mental health clinician. So there could be psychiatrists, but also psychologists, and also social workers, mental health nurses, But also there are people who do become therapy and taking through different routes and who become therapists. And so anyone who engages in therapy, it does not have to, I say, specific training and designation is not what matters. And what matters really is the connection with the young person. Is this someone that the young person feels comfortable with? They feel like they have a good connection with. They feel they trust. They're able to talk openly about things. Feel vulnerable in front of them. That's what matters most.
Okay, Elia, what's the best way for people to find out more about your work? Where can they go?
Well, my work is actually quite broad, and it's not really just specific to this area. I mean, if people Google me at the University of Toronto, a Department of Psychiatry website, there's some more information about the kind of work that I do, but it's really not just specific to this area.
Okay, well, very good. Well, Elia, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Not at all. My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.